Hello and welcome to another episode of Teaching Heroes, the teaching podcast where I ask teachers and educators, what does it take to turn up and teach tomorrow's leaders? And today I have another episode about teaching and educating in the pandemic. And I have the absolute honour and privilege to have Professor Peter Doherty coming onto the podcast. Professor Doherty, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Yeah, it's a pleasure.
So great to have you.
Right.
And I really started the podcast talking to teachers and educators about teaching, but as the COVID-19 pandemic came on, I really saw the impact of the pandemic on teachers and educators, and also how academics and scientists started to come more into the public discourse to really fill a gap that was there about what actually is a pandemic and how do we, live with it. And I've had the privilege of interviewing Professor Catherine Bennett, Professor Sharon Goldfeld, and teachers and students about what it's like. And so I'm thrilled to have you here and to really start to begin to have a conversation about the two biggest states, which still have hundreds and nearly thousands of cases a day, are about to open up. And I'd love us to have a conversation that might start to inch the conversation forward and bring the public along with us. What do you think?
Yeah, good. I've kind of been on the public stage since 1997, which is the Nobel Prize in 1996. And then I was Australian of the Year, living in the United States, but coming back to Australia regularly. And that taught me a lot. And I've been a lot on the public stage trying to defend the climate scientists.
Yes.
Because they've been under virulent and dishonest attack in Australia for a long time.
Yes.
So transitioning into this wasn't too difficult because this is my field. But in actual fact, I'd written a number of books, but I've avoided writing about my own field, which is infection and immunity, because it's too complicated.
Yeah, right.
So I've been putting up articles online, and I have actually written a book, which is, I got to find it. Don't know what I've done with it. Oh, there it is.
I've been reading it on Kindle, Professor, and I was hoping I could hold it up myself, but with Australia Post at the moment, it didn't arrive in time.
And I'd earlier written another book on pandemics.
Yeah.
That didn't sell much here because Oxford University Press is not interested in selling books in Australia, it seems. Yeah. So I've been doing this for a while, and I've learned some things, but I've learned a lot more since the pandemic.
Yeah.
Because I've been on Twitter.
Yes, I know. I'm one of your big fans.
And I've gone from about 16,000 followers to 96,000 or 98,000 or something because I've been talking on this, but also because I tweeted the opening hours of Dan Murphy.
Yes.
Gave me a reputation. And I don't even drink anymore. Sleep better if I don't.
No, it's just exposed. You're exposed.
Exactly.
But I would like to take you back actually to that moment where you realised that your voice was needed in the public discourse. And you talk a little bit about that in the book, but what was that like internally for you, where you were like, oh, hang on a sec, I actually need to step up here and be a voice for
I'd been, I'd written 6 books on science and the scientific life, various aspects of it. And at the end of 2019, I was 79 years old, and our last grant from the last grant I was involved in from NH and MRC was coming to an end. And so I thought, well, I'm going to transition at this stage and focus a lot more outside science. And I actually just was finishing a book, which is my first non-science book. It's about family, and but it's also about, it ended up as Empire, War and Tennis.
Okay.
Which is a definitive work on that, because nobody's ever written that book. And it's going to be published next year by Melbourne University Publishing.
Fantastic.
So I was kind of phasing out and thinking what I would do, and I like to write. I thought I'd write more stuff. Yeah. And then COVID started. I didn't take a lot of notice, and then starting to get a bit concerned. And then Andrea Fisher, our executive officer, suggested I should join what was then a 3 times a week strategy meeting at the Institute. Initially, we had it in a room, and now it's been online for ages. And I was listening to people, and I was suddenly realizing this is for real, and we got a problem. And I was also realizing that even very early, I joined it in March. Yeah. When we'd been working on this for a while, I'd realized very early that our senior scientists were already tired because they were going online at night to be in meetings with European and North American colleagues and attend seminars and all the rest of it. So they were already getting a bit exhausted by it. So I thought, well, what I can do is take some of the pressure off on the science communication front.
Yeah.
So that's what I've been doing the science communication. I'm the junior journalist on the science.
Wow, junior. Would have been a while since you've been a junior anything, I would think, Professor.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, pretty much. I can't even be the youngest in the nursing home at this point.
Well, that's great. And I really noticed lately you've been quite vocal about the vaccine, kind of the misinformation that's out there, and being really generous and, you know, saying to the Twitter public, you know, if you've got an article, send it to me. I want to comment on it. Well,
what has happened is over the months, I've tried to interact with people. I felt my role, if I could do it, was to try and convince the vaccine hesitant, the people who are confused or hesitating, and try and talk to them and try and talk about the risks and the relative risk, because it's all a relative risk equation.
Yes.
Everything in medicine is a relative risk. You know, there's always some risk with any medical intervention, whether it's giving a vaccine or no matter what it is. But that's life. I mean, everything's a relative risk equation. We've got a 1 in 25,000 chance each year of dying in some sort of motor vehicle accident.
Yes.
That's much higher than any risk from, say, COVID vaccines. So that's what I've been talking about. But as I did that, people would send me these articles that justified their position on something.
Yes.
And I would read through them and I'd say, this is totally misinterpreted.
Yes.
And somebody has actually gone ahead and deliberately misinterpreted and put out a false account in some sort of opinion piece, which gets some credibility from the scientific article. So I've been countering that. And I was asking if there is more out there. When I put out that inquiry, which is last week, I basically got pretty much nothing. I've got references to YouTube videos and to some doctors in the United States who I think have been very irresponsible, but I haven't actually had scientific papers thrown at me. So I don't think there's much there. There's just a lot of disinformation, a lot of misinterpretation of adverse event reports. This is an old game for the hardline anti-vaxxers. Whenever you get an adverse event a month or two after, say, a vaccine or something, you can report that. All sorts of people can report it. So it comes up as being possibly to do with the vaccine. Now, most of those things are unrelated to the vaccines, because when you give vaccine to hundreds of millions of people, which is what's been done, some of those people are going to get sick. Some of them are going to die just in the normal course of things.
Yes, yes.
But what the anti-vaccination people is tie that to the vaccine without any investigation. All those reports have to be investigated. And our TGA has a very good website on it, Therapeutic Goods Administration, that actually updates weekly of the risks associated with the vaccines. It's solid and thoroughly done.
The other thing I hear from people who are vaccine hesitant are that doctors are being silenced or they've been taken off YouTube. And so what do you have to say to that? That are they
It's typical conspiracy theory rubbish. I mean, you've ever been around the medical profession and scientists, you know, saying that there's a vast conspiracy involving just about all the doctors, the scientists, the public health people, the people who are driving ambulances and stuff. There's a vast conspiracy of these people who are not speaking up and are silenced. You'd have to be barking mad. I mean, honestly, I lived in the United States a long time.
Yes.
I've been on committees in the US, which is where a lot of the vaccine's been given. They've given a lot more vaccine than we have, obviously. Hundreds of millions of people.
Yes.
So I've been on committees with Americans. I've sat on government bodies. I've done all this stuff. Honestly, if you have 20 Americans in a room, the probability, unless they're trained by the CIA or the FBI, the probability that the information will leak within 24 hours is about 100%.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, it's impossible. It's just ridiculous. Different if they're Swedes.
Yeah.
They're on the Nobel committees, but they don't leak. It's the only group I know that doesn't leak.
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Our parliament leaks, our public service leaks.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, that TikTok guy got leaked the numbers by the New South Wales Health there for a couple of weeks. But
Yeah.
But I don't know about you, but I've been quite astounded by the take, because I think that anti-vax or the vaccine hesitant noise has been so loud that I was just astounded by the take-up of vaccines in Sydney. Like particularly some of the Western Sydney, that were LGAs of concern are up to 92, 95% vaccinated.
In Australia, it's a small population of people.
Yes.
But it's the ones, it's not the people who are rigidly anti-vaccination. These people who are rigidly anti-vaccination would rather take a toxic drug called like ivermectin that stays in your blood for 12 days at least and goes around in your blood, rather than take a vaccine, which is largely eliminated pretty quickly, pretty much natural product actually, and is and turns on your own immune response. I mean, the whole thing is crazy. So those people you'll never convince.
No.
And they bang on about natural immunity. In fact, I've been taken to task for this, for saying, immunologists don't normally talk about natural immunity. We don't. We talk about immunity. Yeah. And basically, George Monbiot, the Guardian columnist, just had an article on this. He said, he's kind of in touch with the counterculture. He's a lefty, he's Guardian. He said, people he knows are dying because of this natural immunity thing, that you'll catch COVID and you'll be immune. Unfortunately, if you catch COVID and you get sick and die, you're not immune. If you catch COVID so that later on you won't catch COVID, it's not really a rational approach. There's a bit of a flaw in logic there.
Yes, a little bit. Okay, so for the vaccine hesitant then, this is what I understand from listening to you and other scientists. So we can say that the vaccines work, they're safe, they significantly reduce death and hospitalisation, they significantly reduce transmission, they reduce the transmission, the replication time of the virus in the individual, and it's our best bet in holding the pandemic.
That's our best understanding of it. We don't have a lot of data on some of those things. Really hard to say, whether vaccinated people are transmitting a lot or a little. It's very hard to sort these things out in human populations. But that's a pretty good summary of it. They'd reduce the whole thing right down. It's a very tricky virus. It's a nasty virus. It's not like any we've seen before. And it binds very, very tightly. The virus binds very, very tightly to the spike protein, to the receptor on the cell surface, the H2 molecule, much more tightly than most viruses. So it's a tough adversary. Yes. But the vaccines are working remarkably well, including in old people, where vaccines often don't work very well. Yeah. And if you look at the mRNA vaccines, for instance, they're pretty much natural products we deal with all the time. There's lipid, that's fat. There's mRNA. We make millions of mRNAs every day. And we destroy them. They don't last any time at all. The spike protein might stick around a bit for a while, but compared with the amount of spike protein you get with the infection, it's negligible. Yes. I mean, really, it's and what these people obsess on is the vaccine and the risk with the vaccine. They don't obsess on the risk of getting the infection.
Yes.
I mean, I just seen data from Tony Kelleher in Sydney, which showed, he was showing that everyone who's had this infection, not people who are fairly mildly infected or even asymptomatic. And then they've been studying long COVID in a very good series, which is a really horrible condition. And you're not going to get that from the vaccine. And basically they're finding though that everybody, not just the people who developed them, have got some sort of measure of what we call immune dysregulation, disrupted cytokine pathways and stuff. So we really don't know what this virus is going to do in the long term, quite frankly.
Yeah. So should be more worried about the long-term impact of the virus, not
long vaccine. And short term. I mean, your chance, the people obsess about the chance of getting myocarditis, pericarditis.
Yes.
I think that's about 6 times as high in that adolescent male group with the infection as with the vaccine. Right. It's basically, and that actually is a lot of myocarditis and pericarditis in that age group in the population in general. They'll get it from other infections and God knows what triggers it. I'm just reading up on it. My Setting It Straight articles I write every week.
Yeah.
I'm going to start dealing one by one in detail with the vaccine hesitant issues. Right. I mean, why they're vaccine hesitant and what the evidence is and what I can find out about it.
Oh, fantastic. Okay, so I just heard this morning that Biden has had a booster shot live on TV. So that's been the talk now. So what's your position? What do you think about boosters? Do we need them?
I think the Israeli data shows very clearly it's a very good idea, especially in older people. Biden's only a couple of years younger than I am. I'm amazed at the level he's functioning. Tony Fauci's about the same age as I am. He's functioning at a very high level. Yes, I'd certainly welcome getting an mRNA booster shot, particularly as the oldies have had the AstraZeneca vaccine.
Yes.
And an mRNA boost after the AstraZeneca vaccine gives you a fantastic boost. My personal view is the higher we can keep those blood antibody levels. You know, we can still get infected in the nose if we get vaccinated.
Yes.
The antibodies, the tiny little Y-shaped molecules that grab hold of the virus and stop it binding to the cell,
yes,
are inert particles.
Yeah.
They don't have a motor. They don't move themselves around. And the same's true of the virus. It's an inert particle. It has no motor mechanism. Bacteria can have motors. I mean, we can see leptospira, for instance, that spin like a corkscrew. They're fascinating to watch. But viruses don't have a motor. They're just like a particle of dust or soot. So up in the nose, it's easy to keep these antibody levels high in the blood. The antibodies are being made in cells in the bone marrow called plasma cells, pump it out into the blood, goes around the body in the blood. And there's a lot, you can keep it at high levels there. Much harder to keep it at high levels up here, especially for a vaccine given in the arm.
Yes.
And so the chance that the virus, when it gets in, the virus will come in the air probably. It hits the mucus layer. All our cells up here are bathed in mucus. That's the snot that we blow out and stuff. And so firstly, it's got to get through the mucus layer to get to the cell. And then, but the probability of it hitting an antibody before it hits the cell is actually fairly low.
Okay.
Yeah, because there's not many antibody molecules up there, but there's a lot of ACE2 up there on the cells. And so the probability of stopping the infection, any respiratory infection with standard vaccine is actually low. We probably get a lot of mild infection with flu vaccines, but we don't measure it. We don't look at it.
Yeah.
So what you said, what is, I think, true, that we probably, though it will grow in the nose, and initially it can grow to just as high a level as it does in an unvaccinated person, we probably eliminate it quicker because the virus has got to grow in cells. All viruses grow in cells. They're obligate intracellular parasites. Okay. But the killer T cells, the cells that I study, are the cells that get rid of those cell factories. They're the assassins of the immune system, the hitman. And it takes a couple of days to turn them back on again. But they should get rid of the virus-producing cells quicker in the vaccinated person. So that's probably what's happening. And I think the reason the vaccinations are stopping severe disease and hospitalization is it's the bloodborne phase that makes us really sick. Okay. We can get a horrible pneumonia from it, but I think a lot of the blood, you've got all these horrible blood clotting issues and so forth. Yes. If you've got antibodies in your blood, I think it's most likely to stop that phase. Because it stops it getting to our heart, to our kidneys, to our blood vessel walls and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, I saw a video that was such a great video that you talked about. That's why the impact of the virus in young people was the blood clots was the part of it. Yeah,
that's part of it. And I think it might be in that. I put up a couple of little hand waving videos on our website. It's under my Setting It Straight series. I'm not sure they're 100% right, and I'm checking some of them out at the moment. I might need to
take some down. Whoops, got that one.
I mean, I've been attacked virulently by people. Being attacked is part of my life at the moment. So.
Yeah. Something new for you. So
no, not totally new, but
so do you think though we would have to boost everyone, or is it just elderly people or immunocompromised people?
I'd certainly boost the immunocompromised.
Yes.
I'd actually give it to older people. anyone over 60, I'd say they're at higher risk. You know, I've been double vaccinated with the AstraZeneca vaccine, and that, as an 80-year-old, that puts my risk down to that of a 50-year-old.
Yeah, right.
So I'm still at significant risk. People who are older and double vaccinated are still at significant risk. So when it does open up, that's this sort of age cohort still going to have to be pretty careful, quite frankly.
Yeah, right. So is there a way to measure then is there a wane rate in the vaccines? Do we know that is there a way to measure that?
We can see the antibody levels fall. There's quite good Israeli data on that. They fall like this. And after infection, they'll stay pretty even, actually, but after vaccination, they fall. And basically what you do when you boost, whether it's the second boost after your first shot or a third boost, what you do is you drive what's called the antibody producing precursor cells, the B cells, back into division, the ones that are specific for the virus. They'll divide again. You'll get more of them. These are the cells that go around in the blood and seed out to the bone marrow to make these big plasma cells that are the antibody secreting cells. So you'll drive up those numbers and you'll drive up the antibody titers. Within about a week or so, the antibody titers will go up again. So I think the higher we can keep those antibodies in blood, the more spillover we get into the nose and the more we can stop the infection, because this vaccine and the Delta virus are not perfectly matched. The vaccine's made against the original Wuhan strain, and it works about a third as well against the Delta. Still working pretty well, and it's still actually stopping the Mu and Beta strains, which we don't have here at the moment, and we hope we can keep out. But it's still stopping them, and it only works about an eighth as well against those. So the vaccines are working remarkably well against these variants. We're not sure we'll actually need vaccines against variants unless we get what's called a true immune escape mutant. I'm not convinced any of the ones we're seeing at the moment have actually been selected to jump the antibody barrier, if you like. I think they've just been selected to grow faster. But we'll see. And you know, we're on a learning curve all the time with this thing. We've been learning constantly since it hit. We thought it was a very different situation back in February, March 2020, 2020 than what we understand it is now. Are there geopolitical,
factors that come in when we talk about boosters? Because I'm just very conscious that there are countries around the world that haven't had the same access to vaccines that we've been lucky enough to have in Australia.
Yes, a lot of people are saying, well, it's amoral giving third booster shots to people if they don't really need them. I'm not really convinced though that the older population won't really benefit from them. Look, our whole challenge now as we move to opening up, I mean, we are already opening up. You can see the discipline has fallen right off in Melbourne. The self-discipline has fallen right off. Some people are simply not complying, and whereas they were more compliant in the past. And New South Wales is opening up, and so far not with a big increase in cases. They've actually been falling, so that's encouraging. So Delta is opening us up, at least in Victoria and New South Wales. So basically, we have to go forward, and I think the strategy that's been laid out is kind of reasonable. Would be great to get 90% vaccinated, but and it's possible we could get 90% vaccinated.
I think Kerry Chant said that yesterday, that she thinks.
I reckon if we
get to 92%.
To catch a lot of the people who aren't vaccinated yet, it's just difficult for them. It's difficult for them to get their head around it, and there may be language problems or just kind of social issues that make it difficult. I think the more we can get vaccinators in vans out there to target individual, not to say jab, because some people are terrified of needles. The more we can get vaccinators in vans out to particularly targeted groups. I mean, they've been doing it with Indigenous communities and so forth. And you have to use your local influencers, your local religious leader, your local community leader, your local doctor. You've got to use all these people, and you've got to put it in the right language. But the more we can get vaccine out to people, and I believe this is a big factor in the US too, actually. A lot of the vaccine refusal hasn't so much been refusal as people just not organized well enough to get themselves vaccinated.
What's the role of mandating vaccines here? Because actually I saw a video yesterday where that, like in Mississippi, that's got one of the lowest vaccination rates for adults, but for children it's really high because they've mandated vaccines for children. So what's the role of, you know, and are there particular professions that, I mean, I was surprised that they, you know, mandated it for teachers, although, you know.
Yeah, basically the public health people don't like mandates, as you can see with the riots in Melbourne, they backfire. There might have been other ways of handling that. I think once we get these rapid antigen tests out, and this is starting to happen now, we haven't used them because we've had such a low incident of infection, and you can get false positives and false negatives. And that was problematic when we had a low incidence of infection. When the incident of infection goes up, though, they're very useful. You can use them on construction sites. For instance, you can give them to if you had people who, school teachers say they're unvaccinated, you could require they do an antigen test every morning before they, it takes 15 minutes, costs about $5–10 or something. So, you know, it's quite feasible. You could have that with people on construction sites too. So the rapid antigen tests are going to be very, very useful. And I believe they're already using them in emergency to get people, when people come in, if they can just test them straight off, 15-minute test, send them straight to COVID ward. So basically that's going to be important. The mandates, I think, for Royal Melbourne has a mandate, everyone has to be vaccinated. University of Melbourne, I think, has a mandate.
Yeah, right.
I think it's better to leave it at the level of organisations than have government mandating, quite frankly.
Yes.
But we'll see.
Okay, so let's talk about testing then. What would be the role of testing going forward, in particular the PCR test? And I'm just wondering, do we still need to, you know, do vaccinated people, for instance, still need to be tested? Or does this mass testing that we have, particularly in New South Wales and Victoria, need to continue? Yeah,
there's all this. We do an enormous amount of testing. We insist that anyone who's a possible contact get tested.
Yes.
Whether we can continue that or not, I don't know. And that's what a lot of the debate about is at the moment. And really, we can't keep shutting people out of the workforce.
Yes.
Because a double vaccinated, for instance, someone in a hospital, double vaccinated, wearing an N95 mask. At the moment, they're locked out of the workforce if they're just in contact with someone. That can't continue. We simply can't do it. And so there's all sorts of changes that need to happen. But that's what the public health people, I think, are thinking through now. Hospitals are thinking it through. We're thinking it through in our institution because we just can't function under those terms. So I think the rapid antigen test is going to be very important. And it'd be a pity in a way that we're not testing everyone because we're getting wonderful data.
Yes.
And a lot of places, the people who are described as unvaccinated may well have had a mild infection.
Yeah.
If they didn't get a PCR test, and if they didn't report to the doctor, they will have been infected. So the rapid antigen tests actually, you know, the vaccine has what's called the spike protein in it.
Okay.
Yeah, that's the main one. But the rapid antigen test is generally directed at another protein that you only get if you're infected. It's called the ribonuclear protein.
Okay.
So the rapid antigen test distinguishes between vaccination and infection, but only current infection.
Yes.
Because what you're testing is basically whether you've got that stuff in your nose, actually.
Yeah, right. I'm actually personally coached by a scientist who's been working with Professor Linfa Wang in Singapore, and I understand that they've developed a test and I think other scientists have as well, in testing the neutralizing antibodies, which is what's going to have you, have a better understanding of your level of immunity. Is there a clinical value for those sorts of tests?
Yeah, that's a good question. Could be, depending on how you use them. You've been talking to Daniel Anderson?
No.
Someone else? Yeah. Okay. Yeah, it could be depending on how you use them. We've tended to avoid antibody testing because you can get a lot of false positives.
Right.
But I haven't heard a lot of discussion about it recently. I can envisage situations where you might use it.
Yeah.
Some of them actually, they're not what we call quantitative tests. I mean, they're color tests.
Yeah.
Often, I think. I haven't actually seen one really yet.
Yeah, right. Okay. Well, I'll get you in contact
I've
with
looked at them online and stuff, but,
he's been
but basically if it's a
mutually.
colour test and if the intensity of colour
Yeah.
measures the degree of positivity, you can often actually make that quantitative by having a simple reader.
Yes.
Which will measure the intensity. And so we could potentially use them to assess how protected, say, older people are, or people with intercurrent other comorbidities. But basically, it's actually easier and cheaper just to give them another jab. So,
right, okay.
So, there's that whole debate. Yeah.
Yeah, I can see that. Yeah. Are we any closer to treatment for COVID-19?
There is well, there are the monoclonal antibodies. These are antibodies against the virus that are made we make antibodies from a single cell. I've just written a whole series. I'm just finishing a whole series about this on the Setting It Straight thing. I'm up to number 8 actually. So the monoclonal antibodies are producing an antibody, for instance, is normally polyclonal. There's lots of these different clones of B cells, all with a slightly different receptor, which will still bind to that RBD on the spike protein. But basically, what you take with a monoclonal is just one of those clones and immortalize it in one way or another. So you've got something you can grow up in culture and produce buckets of the stuff. Okay. So when Trump got sick, this is an old technology. It's around where anyone who's been treated with a drug that's got MAB at the end has been treated with a monoclonal antibody.
Right.
So lots of people have been treated for arthritis, multiple sclerosis, all sorts of things, getting a MAB drug, or cancer. There's some really important ones there too. So basically, the monoclonal antibodies against the virus, basically were given to Trump when he got sick, and he was starting to get quite sick, I believe. And they gave him 8 grams. Now, 8 grams is a hell of a lot of stuff to inject into someone. You've got to inject it intravenously or infuse it, and he got better quickly. And actually, after that, he guaranteed that every American who needed this could get access free. So they cost at least a dose. The actual dose itself costs a couple of $1,000s. And by the time you add all the usual add-ons that go with, say, American medical costs, you're probably talking about $4,000. And you're doing that because people haven't taken a $50 to $100 vaccine. But in Florida, for instance, they've given 40,000 doses of this to people. So 40,000 unvaccinated people who've come in with illness have been treated with this stuff. And it's good treatment, but we haven't bought into it in a big way. We've been making them here. We could have, but we haven't got to the stage of either testing them or getting them to a large-scale production. The government did buy 7,700 doses of one that they could be used to protect some of the people who can't be vaccinated. That's a really low number. So we haven't spent that money. There's also a couple of drugs coming along. There's one called Molnupiravir from Merck, which looks promising. And there's also another one from Pfizer. There may be more out there. The drug development pathway has been very slow. The advantage of the drugs is that they target these are small molecule drugs, chemicals, synthetic chemicals. They target the virus replication pathway, not the binding. And that's not usually where you get mutations. So if you make a drug against, say, Delta, it'll probably work against all the CoV-2 viruses that might emerge. And it actually probably works against all the coronaviruses. In fact, the one that was bought here, called Sotrovimab, was actually made at the time of the original SARS outbreak with a different coronavirus, but it's targeting a common pathway. So it's those therapies work, but they're expensive, and basically we don't have them available.
Yeah. Okay. So, you spend a lot of time in the States, and it occurs to me that the countries that have done the best out of COVID-19 are the ones that with the public health system. And so what is the opportunity we have in Australia, and what are we not taking advantage of?
Well, we've done pretty well, actually. And in some ways, we've done much better than the States. I mean, the state has a massive centralized public health system.
Yes.
which fell down a bit at the beginning, but they have been rolling out vaccine very aggressively since January.
Yeah,
and we were very slow to get the vaccine. We had that glitch with the AstraZeneca vaccine.
Yes. Yeah.
So wonderful country, the US, but it's it's like us. I mean, it's a federated system.
Yeah.
Different states have behaved in very, very different ways. And basically, they do have this coordinated national health system. We don't have that. Everything's at a state level, which is why when you see that until the general came along and took over, you know, the Commonwealth was hopeless with the whole vaccine delivery and all the rest of it. And so we have to improve some of the ways we do things at the federal level. But everything's state-based here. It's coordinated by various committees, which work pretty well. The system has worked pretty well, but it could work a hell of a lot better. Now, the question is whether we can actually have enough institutional memory and so forth to really fix some of the things that need to be fixed.
Yeah.
And you know, I wonder about that. So, you know, I can't in Australia identify any mechanism for long-term strategic thinking at all. You maybe get some of it in think tanks. Nothing in government. I expect the military does it.
Yes.
But I don't know who else and how.
No, that's right. And to take those lessons, and you hinted, you know, before about the glitch of AstraZeneca. I mean, that was really disappointing and really held us back, I think, as a country. And it makes me think about that responsibility of the public voice of scientists, and that there were scientists and science communicators that really downplayed. I mean, because we've been very public about it and everyone's aware of it. No, there's been no attempt to conceal any of this. Yeah, that's right.
We've actually done very well in treating it.
Yeah.
And so even though it might occur at, say, 1 in 30,000 in younger women, which are the main at risk, not the only, but a major at risk, we've only had about 1 in 500,000 deaths.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean other people aren't damaged and they're going to have long-term damage from it. It's a horrible clotting thing. But, you know, if you think of 1 in 25,000 death rate from car accidents, and then you think of the damage to people who don't die in a car accident, I mean, it's very, very low, really, as a risk factor. So the thing we shouldn't do is get in a car across a street or walk on a footpath. I think I'm going to be killed in Parkville by someone who's got 2 small children on the back rushing down the footpath on an electric bicycle. And the mass of that will finish me off.
Yeah, not AstraZeneca.
Not AstraZeneca, not a car accident. I'm going to fall to an electric bicycle.
Yeah, yeah.
Or an electric scooter even, which rather heavy on it.
Yeah. And I heard that statistic that 40% of people who died in America from COVID-19 were diabetic. So it makes me think that there is kind of this, you know, health, and there are other health issues that we really need to be responsible for.
Yes, that's right. But you can't minimize that because, you know, someone who's diabetic can live with it for 40 or 50 years. So the problem with diabetics is their kidneys are in great shape.
Yeah.
So if the virus gets in the blood and it's getting into the kidney and the heart and all the rest of it, and you've got this blood clotting problem as well. I mean, one of the things that's going to kill people and when we open up and you get large numbers of cases, there may not be enough dialysis machines that you can deploy to COVID wards. Yeah. So diabetics are very susceptible. Yeah, it is. Yeah. But you can't really take that as a measure of saying, well, these people are going to die anyway, and they're going to die for a very long time, and they'll have great and satisfactory lives. And that's even true of older people. So,
yeah, absolutely.
Writing people off medicine doesn't do it. Medicine does. And there's no value judgment. If someone rolls up to the hospital and they've got COVID, they're going to be treated the same whether they've been vaccinated or unvaccinated, whether they've been on demonstration. Whether that would change if we really had to triage it or not, I don't know, but I doubt it, not much.
I mean, it does concern me, like kind of point to, it does concern me that, there have been people who've died at home from COVID-19. And I wonder whether the way the discourse has been in Australia around people with COVID-19 is that there's a bit of a shame factor, that you've done the wrong thing if you've got it. And I think that's the kind of conversation we need to change in Australia, to realise we're part of a pandemic and people are going to get COVID, even if you're really safe.
Well, if cases really ramp up in a big way, it's very obvious more people are going to die at home. There won't be space for them. Priority will, I think, as if you're under enormous pressure, priority will be given to younger people for obvious reasons, and so forth. So yes, people will die at home. Now, there was, I think, a report on the television last night of a wonderful young guy and who'd come from one of the African countries. Really made a fantastic job of getting himself trained and getting a law degree, and then he dies at home. And part of the problem is that people can die very quickly, and not be that sick, and we've always known that. And part of the issue here is that your blood oxygen levels drop very, very fast, and people aren't aware of it. They've got very low blood oxygen, but they're not aware of it. One of the things I just did is sign on to Amazon and pay $25 to get a pulse oximeter.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, and $25 goes on your finger. And measures your blood oxygen.
Yeah, right. Okay.
Yeah, well, I think it's, everyone should get one. So.
Yes, get it.
And that's what you need to watch, is your blood oxygen, actually. The other thing that can happen, particularly in fit young people, is a big blood clot, because it is a clotting disease.
Yes.
It's not just a respiratory, it's a clotting disease. You get a big blood clot, you can get a heart attack or stroke, and that'll kill you.
Yeah. But is this kind of inevitable though, like as we open up, that we have to open up, we have to start to learn to live with the realization that we are in a pandemic? Yeah.
Well, if we'd had the same numbers of deaths per head of population as the United States, we would have had at least 50,000 deaths, which is much lower than we thought initially. And initially, we thought it was more lethal than it is, because case numbers were all related to clinical cases. Yeah. So it took a time to realize there's a lot of non-clinical cases. So the death rate from COVID is actually somewhere between about 0.8 and 0.3%, I think. Yeah, so it's much lower than we initially thought. But what we didn't know, of course, about is long COVID, which is affecting, 5%, maybe 5% of people over quite a substantial time, and about 30% of people for a month or two, actually. So really long COVID is a major issue, and permanent debility that may result from that. So you can get permanent debility as a result of this if you're hospitalized and you've got a lot of damage, you're in ICU, and you get some heart damage and all sorts of things. Being in an intensive care unit and being on a ventilator is not good for anybody, especially for someone older, and a lot of people never really come back from it. But so I think about it as post-COVID. The long COVID can follow an asymptomatic initial infection.
So if you're vaccinated then, and if you've got a friend who's decided to not vaccinate, is there any risk to you as a vaccinated person? Because I'm thinking about Christmas time, and there might be people in your family that haven't been vaccinated, but you all want to get together. I think
we'll all inevitably be exposed to people who are infected, whether they're vaccinated and infected or non-vaccinated and infected. And once you get in a room with a lot of people, this virus is very infectious. Better if you're outside. I mean, make sure the Christmas events are all outside. That makes it better. Better if you wear a mask. Actually, people are probably not going to do it, but if you wear those blue masks that you buy everywhere, it actually works a lot better if you've got a cloth mask over the top of it. Okay. Yeah. And so if I'm going into a place where I think it's quite crowded and I don't want to be there, I'll put a cloth mask on top of one of those. Yeah. So that's helps. The cloth masks on the whole are not as good as the as those bluey ones, but some of them are good. Some of them are really good. But.
Okay, great. Okay. So, Yeah, and you pointed to it before. You speak a lot about Australia's lack of action on climate change, and I was wondering, since from a government point of view, and the way people talk out against scientists. So, what are we as individuals then? What can we be responsible for in the face of government inaction?
Well, as far as we can all do things like put solar on our house and drive a smaller car and. Maybe if you feel like it, get an electric car. Though it's problematic still for Australia, the electric car, in that, we run one car, for instance, and do I really want to have to charge it up on all the rest of it? So I'm debating about it at the moment. But as far as government goes, what can we do? It's a terrible problem for Australia because we earn so much money from fossil fuel exports, and we can't minimise it. And the current government has actually locked us into fossil fuels more than they needed to, and so I'm kind of annoyed with them about that. So my advice is basically is think very seriously about how you vote, and neither of the political parties, none of them. Whether it's Labor, the Lib Nats or the Greens, none of those parties are going to be completely in agreement with your position.
Yeah.
So my rather negative formulation is basically look at the policies of the individual, the party, if there is one. I think some of the independents are going to be great, especially in rural areas, and look at their voting record if they've got one. And then basically, and where their preferences are going, and then basically vote for what I describe as the least worst alternative.
Yes.
That's not a very positive message, but I think the least worst alternative is where you start.
Yes.
Because vote for the ones who've got some track record of doing something, and they may be saying other things, but basically look at the ones that are most likely to do something. So that's, I think, the best we can do is politically. Because it requires politics to come to the party. Now, there's a lot that's being done outside politics. There's enormous, really a great desire in a lot of the business community to get on with this.
Yes,
including some of the mining companies, not the fossil fuel miners, but the other miners. But a lot of the big companies want to move forward on this. The insurance industry wants to move forward. The actuaries want to move forward. You know what the actuaries are? These are the people who advise the insurance industry about risk. They describe themselves as the nerds of accounting, if you can imagine. But they're actually quite nice people and very smart.
So, and what about the role of universities? Because with climate change and with COVID, what I think it's signaled to me, my background's in humanities, but I see that we need to kind of come together more as scientists and in the humanities and stop this kind of siloed approach to our education system.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think the more, I'm writing a lot, so I've strayed out of my area and trying to write for a lay audience. I don't think I'm ever going to sell many books, but basically, I think we all have to sort of think across the spectrum. And basically, the universities have a very clear and obvious role, and that's technological innovation. And we should do everything we can. I don't agree with the idea we can just technologically innovate ourselves out of this. It's going to require behavioural change and so forth as well. But that's something I think people in the arts and humanities try and, the question, if we can get it out to people, is what do you really value?
Yes.
And what do you value and what are you going to do about it? Protecting those things you really value. So, and there are also some interfaces between science and the humanities. Many of the people who are sort of enthusiastic bird watchers are humanities graduates. They kind of love the aesthetic. Of course, we all do. So, but many of them get involved in things like, BirdLife Australia's got a thing running at the moment, backyard birds. They get involved in this, where the data is actually reported back to the scientific community. So you can be a citizen scientist, whether you're in the humanities or you're in the hard sciences. Sometimes, professional scientists can sometimes be very, very, very narrow in the way we conceptualize things.
Yeah.
And many of us are not the greatest people persons. You know, we hide away in labs and we get on fine with our colleagues who all share the same values.
Yeah, right.
But we don't put ourselves out there in the community so much. So,
yeah.
I think we need everyone sort of trying to push forward from whatever aspect we can come from. Whether it's a humanities perspective, a psychological perspective, a technical perspective on the actual science itself. Biologists, you know, I get attacked because I'm not a climate scientist, because I stick up for climate science. But in actual fact, half of climate science is the cause, and that's the physical scientists, the oceanographers, the glaciologists, the astrophysicists, all those people who are telling us about the cause. But the other half is effect.
Yeah,
the effect we're interested in. I'm not interested in the effect on rocks. I'm interested in the effect on biology.
Yes. People,
animals, plants.
Yes.
So I'm pretty well qualified to talk on that, I think.
Yes, I think so. So my final 3 questions for you, Peter. Considering all that we are dealing with, what would you like to say to the teachers of the world?
I think the thing that's missing in a lot of our education that doesn't seem to work. And I think it needs to move beyond science teachers, because science turns a lot, just the word science turns a lot of people off. Okay, so it is to give people a sort of concept that the world is governed by relative risk. There are risks. Life is not safe. We deal with risk every day. We deal with risk as we cross the street. We deal with risk under all sorts of situations. As you go up and down stairs. I mean, John Elliott, for instance, died recently. He's just had a fall, I believe. I don't know how he fell. But, you know, those things are there all the time. And we often get caught by them because we don't think the risk through. But we need everyone to think in terms of the relative risk. So a lot of people get totally obsessed with the possible low frequency risk associated with vaccination, but they're not dealing with the much, much higher risk of catching the infection. And it's so hard to break through that shell. And I'm amazed by it. So I think that you can have examples from history, plenty of examples from history, actually. And so, or any field, and logic and philosophy, everything is think these things through in terms of relative risk. I approach everything from the thing of relative risk. It's my training. Yeah. And you know, I'm trained to think in terms of evidence, as far as we can get it. Evidence is often imperfect. We see as well as we can with the technology and the intellectual equipment that we have. A lot of that's being replaced actually by big computing and modeling type scenarios, because we're now getting so much evidence and so complicated that we have to have actually statistical computational systems to understand it. Yeah. So for teachers, for anyone who's interested in, and not particularly interested in science, there's a whole, but if they're interested in math, there's a whole lot of jobs in biology for mathematicians, and medicine for mathematicians, computational people. Yes. And there's jobs in medicine and science for the law. I mean, we have lawyers working with us all the time now. Yeah. And business people, entrepreneurial development and so forth. Yeah. So I think in terms of this as well. It's not, everything is now mixed up. It's all mixed in. There are not separate boxes in the way they work. Yeah.
And what would you like to say to the future leaders of the world?
Yeah, don't be as dumb as some of the people in my generation. You know, the boomers that came after us are the worst of the lot. A lot of them are thick as planks. I mean, think it through. Think about what you're doing. Think about the motivation. Think about, more than anything else, I think about what you really value. I think we all should think, you know, just take a step back. Do we really need to buy the latest piece of consumer crap that we're going to throw away in 6 months? Yeah. I mean, think about what we value. Yes. And put our effort and our resources towards that. Yeah. Because that's what changes things. Is think about what you value and go after helping to make that either stay protected or to make it happen.
Yeah. Right. I have 3 children, 10, 7 and 4. What would you like to say to them?
Well, they're lucky kids. They got smart parents, I'd say, and they're growing up in a good household. A lot of children don't have that opportunity. And that's part of what we have to understand, particularly if we're involved in public communication and public policy, is that the level of opportunity across our society is extremely uneven. The level of education is very uneven. Having good parents who are doing stuff is an enormous benefit. I think there's nothing more powerful, actually. But if you don't have that, you can make your way forward too. But you'll have to do more of it for yourself. Yes. And it's, but there's a discovery, a voyage of discovery. We're all on a voyage of discovery. I'm still discovering things all the time as I try to understand COVID. And also, because I'm on Twitter, try to understand my fellow human beings a bit better. So we're all on a voyage of discovery. And don't stop that voyage of discovery. Keep on with it. Don't become smug, self-satisfied, and what some politician once described as a relaxed and comfortable. That's just indifferent and dead, being relaxed and comfortable. Be aggressive, want to change things, want to make things better. That's what it's about.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Professor, for coming on the podcast. I've just loved our conversation. Thank you so much.
But it's been great. Thanks.